Frank Zane is 83 years old. He still trains, still coaches, and still shares updates about his physique. Updates that continue to draw attention from people who find what they're seeing difficult to believe. Zane won the Mr. Olympia title 3 times and has spent decades discussing an approach to building the body that the broader fitness industry has been slow to adopt. What made Zane distinctive was not size. He competed at under 200 pounds at a time when many of his competitors were approaching 240. His advantage was not genetic or extreme, it was precise. That precision and the system behind it is what this video examines in full. For anyone who has hit a plateau, found that years of training produced a different result than expected, or noticed that chasing size often comes at the cost of shape, Zane's methods developed in the late 1970s remain directly applicable today. Most analyses of Zane's training focus on individual exercises. The more instructive starting point is the structure that held those exercises together. Zane trained on a 3-day split, pulling muscles on day 1, legs on day 2, pushing muscles on day 3. Day 1 covered back, biceps, and forearms. Day 2 covered thighs, calves, and abs. Day 3 covered chest, shoulders, and triceps. The rotation repeated continuously, hitting every major muscle group twice per week, a training frequency that research has since identified as optimal for hypertrophy. Within that structure, Zane anchored each session with one modified powerlifting movement. On pull day, it was the wide grip deadlift performed with straps. He opened his back workout with 6 sets, the first 3 from the floor at 15, 12, and 10 reps, then continued with the barbell elevated on boxes approximately 1 foot high. On leg day, the anchor was the back squat, performed in a pyramid across 6 progressive sets. On push day, it was the bench press. The logic was consistent across all 3 days. Compound lifts built the underlying muscle tissue. Isolation work, cables, concentration curls, flyers, addressed shape. Zane treated these as sequential functions, not interchangeable ones. The compounds established the foundation. The isolations refined what the compounds had built. Mind-muscle connection and posing practice were part of that refinement process, not supplementary concerns. The distinction between building and refining is one that many trainees never consciously apply. Training exclusively with heavy compounds tends to produce mass without definition of shape. Training exclusively with isolations tends to produce limited growth. Zane used both in deliberate sequence as a single integrated system. He followed the same philosophy with cardio, 15 to 20 minutes each day, enough to maintain conditioning without compromising recovery. Sometimes it was the stationary bike. Other days a short jog along the beach or through the streets of Santa Monica. Even in the off-season he stayed lean. There were no dramatic cutting phases followed by bulking phases, no cycles of peak condition giving way to regression. The conditioning was a year-round commitment, not a seasonal one. That consistency, sustained across all 52 weeks of the year, is what produced the physique people still reference as the gold standard of human aesthetics. It doesn't make for an exciting story, and it doesn't sell supplements. But it's what worked, and it's still working at 83. Frank Zane's approach to abdominal training was not incidental. His midsection wasn't developed through a few sets added to the end of a workout as an afterthought. Abba training was a daily practice, performed either at the close of his main session or later in the evening. He built it not through heavy resistance or specialized equipment, but through high volume and sustained focus. Zane stated that he worked up to 1,000 repetitions per day, not sets, repetitions. The result in his own description was that his abs became very deep. The kind of muscular separation that distinguished his midsection wasn't achieved by treating abdominal training as secondary. It required the same rigor applied to any other body part. His routine was structured around supersets, crunches paired with hanging leg raises, 50 repetitions each, hanging knee-ups paired with seated twists, 50 repetitions each, 2 to 3 rounds of each pairing, performed with constant tension and controlled form. No momentum, no compensation. Each repetition was deliberate. The most consequential element of his waist development, however, was the stomach vacuum. The vacuum pose engages the transverse abdominis and obliques, the deepest layer of the abdominal wall, improving waistline appearance, posture, and neuromuscular control. While other competitors focused on surface musculature, Zane was training the muscle that pulls the midsection inward and narrows the waist from every angle. Zane had one of the smallest, tightest waists in competitive bodybuilding. Genetics were a contributing factor, but his daily abdominal training, including up to 1,000 repetitions in competition preparation, and his consistent use of the vacuum pose were what defined the result. Genetics provided the starting point. Discipline determined the outcome. Most competitive bodybuilders did not practice the vacuum. Most do not perform 1,000 repetitions of any exercise, and most did not have Frank Zane's midsection. Zane separated himself from competitors of his era, and from most serious lifters today, not by what he loaded onto the bar, but by how deliberately he trained his mind alongside his body. While others were beginning to explore visualization techniques and mind-muscle connection, Zane was among the first to make this a central, non-negotiable part of his training. It wasn't a side practice or a philosophical hobby kept separate from his lifting. It was integrated into every set, every repetition, every session. Drawing on Zen Buddhist practices, he incorporated meditation, positive affirmation, visualization, and what he called machine meditation techniques into his daily routine. What that looked like in practice was precise and intentional. Mental focus, visualization, and directed intention were core to how Zane approached each exercise. During a curl, he wasn't simply performing the movement and expecting a result. He was actively directing his attention to the working muscle, feeling it contract and visualizing its development through each repetition. He held that concentrated attention improved muscle fiber recruitment and contributed to the symmetry he became known for. One consequence of that approach was a deliberate choice to train with weights below his maximum on movements like the deadlift, squat, and bench press. Lighter loads applied with full attention produced better results than heavier loads performed with divided focus. In a training culture oriented around personal records and maximum loading, Zane was working in the opposite direction, prioritizing depth of engagement over quantity of weight. Hell's mental discipline extended beyond the gym. He meditated daily and used a mantra, repeating it thousands of times throughout the day, one verse with each step while walking. He maintained continuous mental activity except during meditation itself, when the goal was the opposite, clearing the mind entirely. The mantra served as the method, and what remained after it faded, a state of complete stillness, was what he described as the ultimate state. Zane also engaged with questions of mortality and the mind's relationship to longevity, and with what he identified as 3 fundamental obstacles that hinder human performance across domains. For Zane, mental training was not supplementary. It was the mechanism behind physical results. Everything begins in the mind, and his career, spanning multiple decades at a high level, was built on that premise. On the subject of nutrition, Zane's approach during his competitive years was straightforward: high protein, low carbohydrate, and moderate fat, centered on meat, eggs, and vegetables. When training, he used 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight and half a gram of carbohydrates per pound. Healthy fats completed the picture. The structure required no elaborate calculations: protein at 1 number, carbohydrates at half that figure, and fats as a consistent complement. That simplicity, by his account, was not an oversight. It was the point. Where his approach became more deliberate was in the cycling of carbohydrates. Zane followed a pattern of 3 lower carb days followed by 1 higher carb day, a protocol he developed before carb cycling had a name in the fitness world. He arrived at it through observation and decades of attention to how his body responded, not through any established methodology. Pre-contest preparation was more precise still. For 5 days, he would eliminate carbohydrates entirely, then reintroduce them on the 6th day with a single potato. That reintroduction caused his depleted muscles to swell and fill, producing the combination of fullness and conditioning that defined his stage appearance. Many of his competitors came in either too flat or too smooth. Zane consistently found the point where both qualities existed at once. He ate every 2 to 3 hours to keep the metabolism active and supply a steady stream of nutrients to the muscles, 4 to 6 meals a day depending on the training phase. His first meal during training consisted of 3 soft-boiled eggs, 8 ounces of calf liver, and a baked yam. His second was 8 ounces of steak, cottage cheese, and vegetables. Whole foods, dense nutrition, nothing processed, cals proco. His approach to pre-contest water management was equally unconventional. Zane avoided diuretics, explaining that they caused him to lose too much water. Instead, he dried out by spending time in the sun in Santa Monica or Palm Springs. 2 to 3 days on weekends, sweating naturally. That was his diuretic. Rather than chemically manipulating water levels with the risks that approach carries, he used sun exposure to achieve the same result. He came in dry and conditioned without the risk of cramping, collapsing, or overshooting the water loss that left some competitors looking flat on competition day. The sun was not incidental, it was part of the preparation. What Zane's training looks like now, in his 80s, reflects a philosophy built around minimal, effective volume. Training has not stopped, it has changed. And that change carries some of his more countercultural positions on how the body actually responds to work. His concept centers on quality over quantity. Rather than extended sessions, he advocates for a streamlined routine that reduces overall volume while increasing the intention behind each repetition. He has spoken about reducing sets and focusing on what each rep is actually doing. For anyone conditioned to believe that more training always produces more results, the adjustment is not a simple one to make. Zane has stated directly, "I'm more motivated with less to do." Coming from someone who trained at an elite level for decades, that position reflects experience rather than avoidance. He promotes 45-minute sessions as sufficient for growth and recovery. He trains according to his energy levels and works around accumulated injuries. His sessions are shorter, the rest periods tighter, the repetitions higher, the weights lighter. His diet has remained consistent throughout. After more than 50 years of training, his body carries enough muscle memory that maintenance work produces results a younger person's body cannot match in the same way. The decades of effort he put in during earlier years have compounded into a system that now responds efficiently to far less input. To prevent soreness, Zane recommends lighter weights, resistance cables, stretching, and slow deliberate movements. Unlike high-intensity training trends, he advocates this more measured approach for optimal muscle growth and recovery. There is also a concept he introduced that has no real equivalent elsewhere in fitness: time symmetry. Zane describes it as treating every moment as equally valuable. In his framework, there is no ideal time to begin. Every moment carries the same opportunity. His philosophy centers on alignment with the present, neither dwelling on the past nor projecting into the future, but fully inhabiting the current experience. For bodybuilding specifically, this reframes how most people train. The common pattern is enduring workouts as a means to an end, grinding through sessions now in order to look a certain way at some future point, while missing the experience of the process itself. Zane's approach asks for full presence in every session, extracting meaning and quality from the workout rather than deferring all value to eventual results. That distinction is, in practical terms, what separates someone who trains sustainably for 6 decades from someone who burns out after 6 months. As Zane aged, his training philosophy shifted toward health and functional fitness rather than competitive aesthetics. He incorporated yoga, stretching, and meditation to improve flexibility, reduce stress, and support overall well-being. He plays instruments. He practices archery, a discipline requiring stillness, focus, and precision that reflects the same qualities he brought to the gym. One of his goals in his later years is to become a proficient musician. He plays around 7 instruments and continues to improve. He tunes harmonicas and makes flutes, bamboo flutes, both transverse and end-blown, including the Zen meditation flute. At 83, Frank Zane's life is not a reduced version of his competitive years. It is a full integration of what he learned in the gym into a way of living that keeps the body moving, the mind engaged, and the spirit genuinely active. There is a question that underlies everything Zane has shared, one the fitness industry tends to avoid, because the answer is inconvenient. What actually separates the people who build extraordinary physiques from those who spend decades trying and remain frustrated? It is not the program. Every serious bodybuilder has access to effective programs. It is not the diet. The nutritional principles Zane followed, high protein, controlled carbohydrates, whole foods, frequent meals, are freely available. It is not even genetics. Zane has stated that plenty of people had better genetics and did nothing with them. A lot of people have better genes, he has said, but if you work hard and consistently, you can outperform them. The operative word in that sentence is consistently, not intensely, not obsessively, but consistently. Year after year, decade after decade, with the same commitment to quality on a Tuesday afternoon as during competition preparation. That is what the record shows across more than 60 years of his training history. For Zane, the goal is living as long and as well as possible. It is more about health and longevity than impressing others. It is, in his words, a matter of becoming a mature person. He is at ease with passing on what he has learned, helping others pursue the kinds of goals he once set for himself. The real fitness principles rarely sound like discoveries. They tend to be straightforward things applied with unusual consistency by someone who genuinely trusted the process. Frank Zane trained his body with scientific precision, and his mind with discipline, then rested, recovered, and returned the next day to do the same. For over 6 decades. Everything starts in the mind, he has said. We become what we think. Whatever occupies your attention becomes your future. It comes down to what you believe. His own practice has remained consistent: meditation and regular training, an open mind, and a willingness to try what works. At 83, Frank Zane is not the largest bodybuilder in the record books. He was never intended to be. He was the most precise, the most intentional, and the most patient. Those 3 qualities accumulated over a lifetime produced a physique the world still holds as a standard. Not the largest ever built, but by most measures the most refined. The question is not whether his approach works. The record is clear on that. The question is whether it can be applied the way he applied it. Not for a season, not for a single goal, not for a summer, but as a permanent orientation toward training and living.